in the seminar. You want to start, Shelby?
This process starts with the positive personal profile. That is the document that we use to find out the abilities, the desires of the student, the parent input, teacher input, all goes together on this positive personal profile. I still can't get that straight. That is a form that has come through the pilot program. As far as documentation, what we are doing is able to be documented on our original CWTP paperwork. So as far as additional documentation, not necessarily, it's just documenting what we're doing as we always have. Trina, do you agree?
I totally agree. I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly it.
Well, thanks for the question, and certainly thanks for the responses. I mean, you know, I think as we kind of think about any improvement effort, we want to also be thinking about, you know, how do we not add unnecessary burden or processes, but how do we try our best to figure out how to streamline those processes. So just know that the folks behind the scenes working in these projects and the districts are also considering those kinds of things. I mean, in the pilots, it's really been a great opportunity to test some of these things. You know, how can we're not just asking folks to do more, how can we streamline processes that, you know, even better facilitate the work that you're already doing? And certainly if anything new is being introduced, any new processes, and, you know, how do we best streamline those to make sure it's most efficient, effective? So it's a great question, and we'll keep making sure that that's at the top of our list for consideration as we think forward. Well, we're going to move forward to the next questions for the districts, and let me just pause for a moment and say I'm really grateful for y'all hanging on and staying with us. This is a little different kind of format, and obviously we're all in lots of different places. So we really appreciate your patience and your engagement, and we'll move forward to the next section and talk a little bit more with the districts. So I don't know whose turn it is. So flip a coin, imaginary coin. Simpson County is going first. So Kentucky, both of these projects are built on a really clear expectation that everyone can work, and also build on you know, commitment to support individuals to obtain competitive integrated employment. So as you've thought about that expectation in your districts, and certainly as you've shared that expectation that everyone can work, and we need to talk about supports and to make sure of that. But as you've shared those, what have been some reactions that you've had from maybe students, maybe parents, maybe your own colleagues in your school building or district, or in the community? Kristen, would you start in response to that?
Sure. Our reactions, you know, whether through the students, the parents, colleagues, and community, has been very positive. Everything that we have really seen, the parents, you know, starting off were excited. They were also a little nervous. Some of these parents haven't thought past graduation at this point. So to go ahead and start having those conversations of, you know, post-secondary or employment opportunities, it really made them start thinking. Some of them were nervous. Some of them were excited. One of our students was able to obtain employment at a local fast food restaurant. And when we called the mom to tell her that the student had obtained employment, her response was, she had tears. She was crying. She just did not know that that was actually feasible for her daughter. So it's breaking down those barriers, not just in the community, but also for some of these parents that may not have realized that this was a possibility for their student. So for us, everything has just been very positive as far as reactions from the students. They're excited. They're excited to go out and learn about new jobs, and the parents are excited about the opportunities that they're being given. I've had several teachers that have, you know, offered, you know, different connections for us in the community. And our community really, of course, like I said, we've had a couple of shut doors, but for the most part, it's been acceptance and wanting to really rally behind this program.
Thanks, Kristen. What about y'all over in Montgomery County?
I think I agree with Kristen. The parent involvement has been very enlightening. Just planting the seed that, yes, your student is capable of working. Yes, there is something for them after graduation, after they exit school. And just giving the parent the opportunity to come in and, Arden has said this before, unlike an ARC meeting where you're being told, okay, this is a goal, we've met this goal, no, we've not met this goal. This gives the parent the opportunity to brag on their child, to say, they can do this at home, they do this at home. It's been very good communication with the parents.
Grateful. Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both for that. It's great to kind of get a sense of reactions that you've experienced as you've really kind of leaned in and kind of pushed in on that expectation that everyone can work. And so great news and great starts there in these districts. And one of the things that I would suggest here, and I think I said it a little bit earlier in our time together, is this, this notion of high expectations is obviously, as we all know, a very important one. And I do, from a personal perspective, one of the ways that I make sense of it is I say, high expectations are non-negotiable. So we're not going to, have a situation where we have low expectations for someone, right? So high expectations are non-negotiable, but it's also very important to understand, of course, that while that's true, it's also individually realized. So we can't just kind of have this blanket high expectation and then forget to have the kind of conversations we need to have about the supports and resources individual students need to actually achieve those expectations. So I think it's really important and been great to hear the district's perspectives on this and your experiences in this. And it's really great to hear that your reactions have been pretty positive and very specific kind of stories and examples of some shifts maybe in thinking. So thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing that with the folks who are gathered here today. So let's move on to this next question. We'll start with Montgomery County on this. It's certainly not lost on the folks probably who are on this call that individuals with disabilities, face barriers to competitive integrated employment. And I think many of them do. And certainly as we think about individuals with disabilities, maybe significant disabilities, certainly face at times barriers to competitive integrated employment. And we talked a lot about that expectation just a few minutes ago, which may be the biggest barrier, but we wanted to give opportunity for y'all to share any other barriers that you've observed and how you're attempting to address those through this effort. We'll start with Montgomery County.
Arden mentioned earlier transportation. We do not have public transportation in our community. It's something that we're working on countywide, on the county level. We have communities actually applied for a grant to be able to purchase a vehicle to use for some limited transportation. So as well as working on the state level, trying to utilize non-emergency transportation. It's been a process trying to get that in place and have those opportunities for students. A lot of our students live in a rural area, and it's not convenient for a parent who works to take a student to work and then pick them up and go home. So transportation is an issue. Parents being afraid of their student losing benefits has been another barrier that we've worked to overcome. Having to see those numbers and look at that, how much they can make each month and not take a chance on losing their benefits. I think that's been an obstacle. Sometimes I think resistance that we get from parents may be that they don't have the expectation for their student to be able to be successful in the workplace, and they want to shelter their child. in some situations just to protect them. I think it's a parent's instinct to do that. So having to broaden those parents' horizons has been sometimes a barrier.
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of awareness of options that they do have and of things that they can do. And not only by the employers, we talked about that previously, but also by the parent and the students themselves. You know, really talking about those students' interests and saying, well, you know, when you go to that store and you see people working there, what are they doing? Could your child do that? And they start thinking about, you know, they really could possibly do that. And then we are attempting to give them the tools to be able to get there.
Thanks. Kristen, what would you add in response to that question about, you know, additional barriers and how you're attempting to address them there in Simpson County?
Well, with us, it's very similar to Montgomery County. Transportation is a big issue, a big barrier for us, as we do not have public transportation either. Another, you know, the benefits, that is something that I've had to sit down with the parents and kind of go over, because there is a true fear of that. So really, you know, for us with Montgomery County, it's very similar, making those parents understand too that, you know, there are job opportunities out there for each one of their kiddos. You know, for one of my students, you know, one of her barriers is her physical limitations, being able to handle things. She has one very her hand is just not very strong, and so lifting or, you know, fine motor stuff, even some gross motor things are a limitation for her. So it's just working through those barriers, getting our physical therapist involved with, you know, trying to help her modify some things, our OT involved as well, trying to get those types of services for the student out in the workplace to kind of help modify for her. But I agree with Montgomery County. You know, that's the bigger barriers are, how are we going to provide after high school? How can we provide transportation for these students for work? You know, in Simpson County, we have a lot of factory work. A lot of our parents have those hours, and so it's making sure that those students can be able to get to work when they need to be.
All right, thanks. Great responses here and great perspectives from folks who are, you know, implementing this every day, you know, on the front lines, just like many of you who are on the call today. Well, this is another time we're going to pause for some questions from participants. I've seen a few things in the chat box. So Walt, if you can let us know about that. I do want to mention, I appreciate all the active activity in the chat box, not only the questions, but also many people jumping in and providing resources and supports. And I know I haven't seen all of those, but I do appreciate our colleague, Carolyn Wheeler, who has, I think, popped in the chat box a link to a short video on benefits and impact of work on benefits. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And that's always, of course, a really important question. But before we move to questions, Walt, Trina, anything to add from sort of that last little chunk of questions that we had? And okay, if not, sure. No, you're unmuted.
I am now. Okay. I think it's always been, you know, transportation's been an issue, and Shelley's right. They've been working on some really great things for options for transportation. And we do, our school folks do the best they can with trying to educate the parents on working and, you know, and still receiving, you know, your check. And there's the student earning income exclusion. But it's just, you know, it's one employment specialist against all these parents. It's hard fought. And I think that those probably are two of the biggest challenges. You know, reality, I think that's just reality. And that's probably the biggest obstacles that I know our folks face.
Thanks, Trina. Walt, any questions during this last section?
We had one question, and the question was, any resistance from parents who don't want their child to obtain employment, thinking they will lose their benefits?
So, I mean, I think that's a great question, and certainly we hear versions of that question. And sometimes, as I think we've heard already, it's just a matter of sometimes it's awareness. I think sometimes, maybe folks have received less than accurate information about those types of things. But let's give the districts a opportunity to jump in there. Shelby, anything to add in response to that question? And Kristen, I'll come to you next.
I think it is a concern. Even if it's not a spoken concern, we will, parents will in a roundabout way come out and say, what about our health insurance? What about our Michelle P? They may not say clear cut, I don't want my student to lose their check, but they are concerned about how this will affect the services that their student could receive. So it has just been a process of educating them and almost approaching it before it even becomes asked. Kind of combating it before it becomes a concern of the parent.
Anything to add, Kristen, from Simpson County?
No, that's kind of the perspective that we've had. Is I think looking forward into other potential students that we're going to put into this program, doing what Montgomery County just said, taking more of a proactive approach with it and providing that information up front before it does kind of become, a question later. Just giving them all of the information up front, I think would help before. That way they see the bigger picture up front, and it's not something that they have in the back of their mind as a barrier.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we do hope that was responsive to the question. And again, you're going to see contact information for us at the end of this, and particularly folks in the district there and other HDI staff, and we'll continue to be obviously available to y'all and answer any questions, or if we can't answer it, figure out how to get you an answer even after this seminar is over. A couple other quick things, Walt, before we see if there's additional question in this section. I appreciate also our good colleague, Christina Bard, has posted a resource in the chat relative to transportation, and that's a really exciting initiative and effort at HDI, and our colleague Maria Kemplin leading that really great work. So we hope you find that resource helpful too. Walt, any other questions?
Yes, we have a question, and the question is, can you explain what processes or elements the pilot added to these two districts' participation in the CWTP? Participants have noted an increase in family engagement and employer participation. How did they do this?
Trina, do you mind kind of taking a first shot at that? I think what might be responsive, you can tell me if you disagree, just really are those three big components we've talked about. You mind
I'll do my best. I may get a coughing fit here. You may have to take over. And I think, and the girls have actually mentioned them. We had a person, we had a PPP, which is a person profile that they sent to the parents, the students. They filled it out. I think they had teachers fill it out that shared information on the student. And then we did what was called a family interview, which we like to call family conversation, where the parents were brought in and we had them, the employment specialists talked and the teachers talked with the parent. And then there was the employer interview, which is an employer interview, and the girls talked about how that works as well. Those are the three tools so far that we've utilized through the pilot that would typically be different than what we've used in the past with the community work transition. That's not to say that the other schools have not talked to their parents. They've done the employer piece. They made, the PPP is kind of like an interest survey almost, but it's just it was a definite tool that we used. Even when they did the employer interview, they had a script. They had a tool that they took with them and the questions to ask and responses and those kinds of things. And they may, Shelley and Kristen may be able to add to that even better, because even though we were with them when they did some of these, they've done quite a bit more since we visited with you all probably. But that's the three pieces that would be a definite difference.
Yeah. Let me see if I got that right. So one would be this, I think we call it the student positive personal profile.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. And we're really trying to get at interest of students and all the things every day. It's just a tool. The second was a parent conversation. And I think there, we really, concerned about a lot of things, but one of the real powerful things in this, I thought, was just really asking a parent from their perspective, hey, think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever, and what's a great life look like for your child from your perspective and really then to start brainstorming with them around opportunities and even contacts within their own network. So that student positive personal profile, which really I think districts can explain this better, is an ongoing sort of a dynamic document in a way. You continue to add to that. And the parent conversation certainly informed that, as did the number 3 kind of concrete component that Trina talked about, the employer interview. So I think those are the 3 kind of big tools or concrete components. Anything to add, Shelby or Kristen?
I will say we keep referring to these as tools. And early on, I was confused of what tools are we going to be using. Okay, these are actually worksheets,
Yes.
papers for us to fill out that have questions. It's a guided interview with the parents. It's a guided interview with the employers. You're really not asking things that you wouldn't normally ask, but it's the order in which that you're following this. A little more specific. And I had seen someone ask a question earlier about, do we approach the employer initially saying that we're working with students with disabilities? We don't. Through these tools, we are taught not to do that. We are there initially. Yes, we have a student in the back of our mind or multiple students that we're thinking about when we go to this specific employer. But when we're there, we're finding out the employer's needs and letting them know that we're going to work towards helping meet those needs that they have.
Anything to add, Kristen?
No, I agree with that. That's the mindset that we've had. We use this as more of a guide. When we got the parent interview, we didn't ask all the questions. We would have been there for 3 hours had we asked all the questions. But it was definitely a guide that we used to kind of open up some communication between the parents and us, and then based on those questions, new questions arise that may not have been on the guide. So it really kind of gave us a better understanding of what to ask, whether it be employers or families.
Thanks. Well, great. Walt, any more questions in this section?
We did not have any other questions. We did have a comment.
Okay, great.
And the comment is the OVR counselor should be offering to do a benefits analysis for every SSI, SSDI recipient. This can be done once they are made eligible or after an IPE is developed. The sooner, the better is going to help ease the students' and parents' minds about going to work.
Great. Well, thanks for that comment. Very helpful comment. In terms of these resources, guides, or whatever makes the most sense in terms of these sort of concrete components that we were talking about, I would love to pull, before we move on, I'd love to pull Arden back into this conversation for just a minute. Arden, from a district administrator perspective, which you are, of course. One of the things that I think is really important to all of us as we support districts and schools is, this again is not just about introducing, well, here's a bunch more work that y'all can do. It's really trying to figure out, how do we leverage the great work you're already doing? How do we support you in making it even more efficient and effective? So from a district administrator standpoint, how are we doing in terms of hitting that mark? Are we close? Were there areas for improvement on that?
No, I think it absolutely did. It really helps to narrow down the focus for these students and for the employers, so that we're not prying things, I can't put this the right way, so that we just have a more focused approach going in and we don't have to spend extra time. I think the way the questions are asked and the way the process runs, it makes everything more efficient just because of the way it's set up, because of the way the process runs, the data that we collect on the front end that helps us make better decisions at the end.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Arden. That's really important perspective. Well, I'm kind of taking a look at the time. I think we're good. I think we're in good shape, but we're going to move on to the next couple of questions for the districts. And I think we're going to have plenty of time at the end for additional questions that you may have as participants. So, Kristen, you're going to be on deck here to start. We've talked a lot today, as we should, about prioritizing the needs of individual students. But also, you know, with that, we know it's important to prioritize the perspectives of their parents and families. We've leaned into some of this through other responses, but maybe to put a little finer point on it, Kristen, and then Shelby and Arden, how are you doing that in efforts you're leading in your district? This could be a good opportunity for y'all to talk a little bit more about your experiences in the parent conversations or anything else that you think is relevant.
Okay. So yeah, this is what we use the parent interview for. And with the parent interview, like we said, we were given questions that was on this guide that we had, but within that guide, you know, those were just guiding questions. So these parents were, honestly, they hadn't seen the questions before, and some of them, they provided the parents an opportunity to really kind of think, you know, where do you see your child in 10 years from now? Where do you see them in 20 years from now? And it really got that conversation going. I've worked with these parents. Most of these kiddos that we have in our program are seniors. And I've worked with these parents for at least the last 5 years. I've known them since they were in 8th grade, some longer. But, you know, it gave a whole new perspective on information that they were providing. So, you know, I learned about different talents and different barriers and different experiences that these students had just by interviewing these parents and having these guiding questions. So it really opened up our knowledge of, okay, well, you know, I didn't know that student A loved to make YouTube videos and do certain activities. You know, I didn't know that. So now we started thinking, okay, well, what other businesses are there? What can we explore with that? So we really used this as an opportunity to get to know the students better. It gave us a better insight to them. And looking forward, we are going to be using those parent interviews starting in 8th grade as part of transition to go ahead and start getting some of that information out there and go ahead and getting some ideas together. The earlier that we can start preparing these students for life after high school, the better it's going to be. So that's kind of how we are approaching it now versus kind of the way we did it before.
It's been the same with us, Kristen. I do like your idea of starting these conversations at the 8th grade level. That's a really great idea. Moving forward, it's been the same for us. Just honing in on the students' interests, their abilities, by bringing more people to the table when we do these interviews with the positive personal profile and the parent interview. We're just getting a different perspective that we may not get when we meet one-on-one with a student. They're doing things at home that they're not doing at school. They're expressing things to their parents that they're not expressing to teachers. So I think that's something that we will continue to use with all of our students in the program. You know, we have moved forward with we haven't done parent interviews with all of our students, but we have completed the positive personal profile with all of our students in the program, not just our pilot students. We have seen the value of that.